When it comes to later history, then it is really with the Crimean War that the British appear as far east as in what is today Ukraine. Back then, of course, it was a part of Tsarist Russia and the Russian Empire after 1721. These contacts, however, were usually based on the fact that the Russians did employ Cossack troops as part of their army. So here you would have Ukrainian soldiers on the opposing side of the British armies. However, they would encounter each other in battle. Later on, we also have, after the First World War, we have some diplomacy taking place with this general chaos going on in Central Eastern Europe, these wars for controls of the border, of these new states that were being created, and naturally Great Britain being a great power, they would always have something to say when it came to diplomacy and exactly where these borders should be. Famously, the British stance on Poland, and Lloyd George especially here, was not a big fan of any type of large Poland. So here the Ukrainians would favor his side and see it as something better than what the French and the Poles thought the border should be. So there was some goodwill that was created in the early 1920s or late 1910s when it came to that issue. Then, of course, we have Ukraine as being a part, or at least 90% of it or so. There was a small little part that was part of the Second Republic of the Polish Second Republic that today is a part of the modern Ukrainian state. But of course, the majority of the chunk of the territory was in Soviet control. And there you would have some British-Soviet interactions. But again, they were on the opposing sides of the great conflict that was taking place, the Cold War. So naturally, those relations were also not very close. The real start, you could say, of modern Ukrainian-British relations is the visit by Prime Minister Thatcher in 1990, which is at a moment where Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union. They didn't declare independence until 1991. But by 1990, it was clear that things were moving, and there were some statements by Thatcher during her visit to Ukraine that made it apparent to the Ukrainians that she was more open to the idea of an independent Ukraine than George Bush, who also visited Ukraine soon thereafter and delivered the famous Chicken Kiev speech in which he warned for independence and suicidal nationalism. So when Ukrainians of that time compared Thatcher and Bush, the UK came out favorably. There was also a Ukrainian diaspora living in the UK after the Second World War, not as vast as the Polish one, but nevertheless it was a start of the start of Ukrainian societies living in the UK. As I mentioned, they were never very big, but they were made up of either prisoners of war from the German army that were of Ukrainian heritage, or they were Ukrainians that had joined the Polish army in the West, first in France and later relocated to the UK after the fall of France. Parts of them were ethnically Ukrainian, but they had been citizens of the Polish Second Republic, and thus they had ended up in the UK and mainly in Scotland. There were some tensions between the Poles and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were not always as eager to continue their service in the Polish army. Some of them decided to drop out. And then finally, you also had a group of Ukrainians that had been taken as prisoners by the Germans and were used in labor camps, and who were later liberated by the Allied armies marching into German territory. Some of them also ended up in the UK after the war.
Adam, as usual, the clock in the corner of the studio has defeated us, so I'm going to have to ask you to pause there. We'll pick it up next time. There we are. Time and tide wait for no man, certainly not in television studios. Anyway, fear not. If you join us next time, as we hope you will, we'll continue the story here on Poland Daily History. Thank you for watching.